Warm welcome to everyone, and I'm so happy and thankful to each and everyone who subscribed and viewed my channel. And I thank you for the people for supporting me, and thank you so much. So now let us move into our session. In the previous session, we discussed about respiration. Okay, so let us see a quick recapitulation of respiration. So when we are talking about respiration, we need to remember that respiration is a process where the respiratory substrate or the respiratory fuel are broken down further to release energy. And this respiration generally it occurs in two types. One is aerobic respiration, the other is anaerobic respiration. Aerobic respiration generally it occurs in the following steps. One is glycolysis, which occurs in cytoplasm. Krebs cycle, it occurs in mitochondria. Electron transport chain, it occurs in the inner membrane of mitochondria. And oxidative phosphorylation occurs at F0 and F1 particles. And aerobic respiration, whenever we are talking about aerobic respiration, we need to remember that it occurs in the presence of oxygen. The aerobic respiration, that is the respiratory substrate, it is further broken down. It is further broken down in the presence of, that is the glucose is further broken down in the presence of oxygen. Then when we are talking about anaerobic respiration, it occurs in the absence of oxygen. That means what? The glucose is further broken down in the absence of the respiratory fuel, whatever it is further broken down in the absence of oxygen. So in this anaerobic respiration, in the last session even we discussed about fermentation process. If you remember, the conversion of sugars into alcohol, ethanol, if you see there, conversion of sugars into alcohol where carbon dioxide is released, that is what we have discussed in the fermentation process. It is called as a fermentation. So this was a quick recapitulation about our last session. Now let us go into the detail of glycolysis. When we are talking about glycolysis, we need to remember that the glucose is broken down. The glucose gets splitted or it gets sliced, right? So this glucose, when as this process in this session we are discussing about aerobic respiration, we need to understand that the process of glycolysis, even though it is aerobic respiration, the first step will be anaerobic respiration. So here the site of the glycolysis takes place in cytoplasm. Okay, and this cytoplasm, it is a fluid medium which occurs in the cell, and within this fluid medium even the cell organelles are embedded in it. Now when we are talking about this glycolysis, one more interesting or one more important thing which we need to remember is about the scientist, and this was given by three scientists. The process of glycolysis was given by the three scientists, Emden, Meyerhoff and Parnas. So to understand this concept, let us go more in detail with the help of the slides which I prepared for you, and even the notes and the content is reflected in it, so that whenever you get time you can go through these notes too. So let us go more in further. That is the glycolysis. It is a metabolic process that function as both. It is the same both process for both, basic process for both aerobic and anaerobic respiration. In the next, if you see, during glycolysis, the glucose is broken down into pyruvate, or the pyruvate is obtained from the glucose. And if you see in my third point, you can even like if you are writing notes, nothing to worry, even point wise everything I have mentioned in detail over here. So glycolysis takes place in the liquid part. So if this is our cell, here within the cytoplasm generally glycolysis takes place. And here the most common, if you see here, it is also called as EMP pathway. If you see here, EMP pathway. Why? Because it was given by the three people. The process of glycolysis was given by the three people, Emden, Meyerhoff and Parnas. Emden, Meyerhoff and Parnas. You need to remember these names. Okay. So let us go more into that. So when we are talking about this glycolysis, if you see here, when we are talking, see here, these are the 10 steps. The process of glycolysis, if you observe carefully, it is occurring into 10 steps, or it takes place, it is a 10-step process. So within this 10-step process, if you observe the first few phases, if you observe, this is called as an energy investment phase. You need to understand and try to observe it carefully when I am explaining it in the slide, and later you can watch this video once again and you can prepare your notes. So the first few steps are called as energy investment phase, and the next few steps will be energy payoff phase or energy payout phase. Why? Because generally, what is respiration? Respiration, it is a process where the respiratory substrate need to be broken down and energy is released. But in glycolysis, in the first step process, if you see, the energy is utilized, our ATP is utilized, hence it is called as energy investment phase. Okay, so we can say that the glycolysis takes place in two phases. One is energy investment phase, and the second phase, if you see, the energy payoff phase or energy payout phase, we call it, right? So how this process takes place, let us see over here with my next slide. So the glucose, if you observe carefully here, this glucose, it gets converted into glucose 6-phosphate. The glucose is getting converted into glucose 6-phosphate by what? By ATP. So here what is happening? From the ATP, a phosphate group is added to the glucose, okay, making this glucose into glucose 6-phosphate in the presence of an enzyme called as hexokinase. So here phosphorylation is taking place. So if you see here once again, if you try to understand this concept, it's very simple. These steps, to remember these steps, it is very simple. So once again, you see here, even the notes I have provided over here itself. Later you can view once again as many times if you want, and you can take down the notes. So what is happening here in the first step of glycolysis? The glucose is converted into glucose 6-phosphate. But how it is getting converted? It is utilizing one of the phosphate group from the ATP, and it is giving it to glucose 6-phosphate in the presence of an enzyme hexokinase. So here one more thing you have to understand, that whenever the phosphate group is adding to the glucose, so here is the point, it traps the glucose in the cell, due to which the glucose with the phosphate cannot readily cross across the membrane. So it is unable to cross. It will be present within the cytoplasm only. Okay. So next one. So we'll move further. What happens? That is the glucose 6-phosphate. Now it gets converted into its isomer form. Now what are isomers? So already you should know by this now, by the time, that these are the chemical compounds which are having the same chemical formula, but their properties or the arrangement of the molecules will be different. So what is happening here is, to the glucose, to our glucose 6-phosphate, the glucose is converted into fructose 6-phosphate. These both act as isomers. So here you can see here the glucose 6-phosphate is converted into its isomer form, that is fructose 6-phosphate. Now this fructose 6-phosphate, in the presence of an enzyme, okay, in the presence of enzyme, again with the help of the energy, our ATP, so it will be utilizing one of the phosphate molecules. So let us see here. So once again, let me draw it for you. So our fructose 6-phosphate, the fructose 6-phosphate, which is an isomer of glucose 6-phosphate, now it is getting converted into fructose 1,6-bisphosphate. Now how this is happening again? The same thing. The energy is utilized over here. So what is happening here? A phosphate group is transformed from the fructose 6-phosphate, and it is given to or it is produced from fructose 6-phosphate. It is producing fructose 1,6-bisphosphate. It is producing bisphosphate, and in the presence of an enzyme called as fructokinase. Fructokinase, phosphofructokinase. And one of the important fact you need to remember, that this phosphofructokinase, it helps to speed up or slow down of the glycolysis process. So need point of view, you have to understand, you have to remember this phosphofructokinase, which either it helps in regulation of the speeding up process, or it also slow down the process in glycolysis. Now let us move more into the detail, that is next. Once this fructose 1,6 bisphosphate, okay, this 1,6 bisphosphate, okay, now it gets broken down into two molecules of 3 carbon containing compounds. Okay, you have to, it gets converted into two molecules, it gets divided into two molecules. One will be the glyceraldehyde 3 phosphate and the other will be dihydroxyacetone phosphate, DHAP we call. It gets converted in the presence of an aldolase and enzyme, so we'll see that too here. So if you see here, the fructose 1,6 bisphosphate, if you watch carefully here, in the presence of an enzyme, aldolase, it is breaking down into two molecules. So this one will be our first and second molecule. Okay, it is breaking down into two molecules, in which one of the two, both will be 3 carbon containing compound. So we can say that glyceraldehyde is one of the 3 carbon containing compound, and dihydroxyacetone phosphate is 3 carbon containing compound. And if you see here, this arrow mark, it represents they both act as isomers to each other. They both act as isomers to each other. That means what? Our glyceraldehyde 3 phosphate breakdowns further into a series of steps, but dihydroxyacetone phosphate is isomer to glyceraldehyde 3 phosphate. So it will be directly converting into that, and further steps takes place. So here twice, whatever the products which we are obtaining from this step, twice we need to calculate. So let us see these steps too one by one. In these steps, if you observe carefully, this glyceraldehyde 3 phosphate, you see, as it is isomer, and this glyceraldehyde 3 phosphate in the presence of an isomer, it is getting converted into 1,3 bisphosphate. So what is happening here? The glyceraldehyde 3 phosphate, which is 3 carbon containing compound, here what is happening? It is getting oxidized. So when it is getting oxidized, the aldehyde group is converted into acids. That is glycerate. So if you see here, 1,3 bisphosphoglycerate. So what is happening? It is getting oxidized. The glyceraldehyde 3 phosphate is getting oxidized to 1,3 bisphosphoglycerate. Aldehydes are getting converted into acids. And here one more concept here we need to remember in this concept is, that is here the NAD plus, that means what? A redox reaction. NAD plus is getting reduced. Here a redox reaction is occurring to NADH2, or we can say NADH plus and H plus. Okay, a redox reaction is occurring, an oxidation process is taking place, and apart from that, in the presence of an enzyme, triose phosphate dehydrogenase, this entire reaction takes place. So our fifth step and sixth step, if you see, it is a continuation to that. That is, first thing is you need to understand that glyceraldehyde 3 phosphate, it undergoes oxidation process. Okay, it is undergoing oxidation process, and it is undergoing the redox process, the reducing process, because our NAD plus, it is getting reduced to NADH plus and H plus ions. And one more thing you need to remember, that each NADH plus carries 3 ATP molecules, but these will be in the check form. So whenever we visit a bank, directly, in few certain cases, directly we don't receive the amount. We need to place the check, then only we will be obtaining that currency. So here also in future, in further process, generally these NADH plus molecules are utilized for the production of ATP. Hope till here you have understood. So let us move further. And one more thing you need to remember, that is here, it is an exorganic process. If you see here, it is an exorganic process, and the releasing energy that is used to phosphorylate the molecule by forming 1,3-bis phosphoglycerate. Right? So far, I hope till here it is clear. Now let us move to the next step. So now in the next step, if you observe 1,3-bis phosphoglycerate, 1,3-bis phosphoglycerate, okay, in the presence of phosphoglycerokinase, this is the enzyme, it is getting converted into 3-phosphoglycerate. But how this process is occurring is, this 1,3-bis phosphoglycerate is donating its phosphate group. It is donating its phosphate group to whom? To ADP. And here ultimately the ADP, whenever the phosphate group is added to ATP, it forms ATP. So what is happening? 1,3-bis phosphoglycerate, what it is doing? It is donating one of its phosphate group to ADP by making the molecule into ATP. So here our energy is released finally. Directly the ATP is released. So here what is happening? The energy payoff or the energy outphase is started. Payoff is getting started. Okay, by donating a phosphate group to ADP, it is getting converted into ATP. Very important step in glycolysis process. Then here further I have mentioned our 8, 9, 10 steps at a time, so that it will be easy for you, and even the notes I have mentioned here. So you can do watch my videos over again and again, and you can, whenever you require these notes, you can copy it. So here what is happening, let us see in the first step. So this glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate, again it is converting into 2-phosphoglycerate in the presence of an enzyme phosphoglyceromutase. Again this 2-phosphoglycerate, now it is getting converted into phosphoenol pyruvate. It is getting converted into phosphoenol pyruvate by releasing 2 molecules of water and in the presence of an enzyme enolase. Don't worry, everything is mentioned in this step. You can refer this step and you can watch my video. Right? Then in the last step, if you see the pyruvate part, the pyruvate, that is the phosphoenol pyruvate, which PEP, the PEP in the presence of an enzyme pyruvate kinase, what is happening? It is also donating one of the phosphate group to the ADP, making the ADP getting converted into ATP. So one more energy is released. So our end product will be the pyruvate. So at the end of glycolysis, now you need to remember that from glyceraldehyde 1 pyruvate is formed. Simultaneously from we are having one more splitting part. If you have remembered, at fructose 1,6-bis phosphate, dihydroxyacetone phosphate is formed. So there also the same series of steps takes place, and at the end of the glycolysis process we have 2 pyruvate molecules. We have 2 pyruvate molecules. Hope you have understood till here. So let us do a quick summary of the entire process once again in the form of the flow chart at a time. So if you see here the glyceraldehyde, if you see here the glucose or respiratory fuel which is being obtained. So this glucose is converted into fructose 6-phosphate, and fructose 6-phosphate, it is converted into fructose 1,6-bis phosphate. You need to learn these enzymes because they're playing an important role in breaking down of this glucose. And when we are talking about the first few steps in this reaction, the energy is being utilized. The ATP is utilized. Utilizing in the sense of what? One of the phosphate group is added to the glucose over here, converting the glucose into glucose 6-phosphate. Or if you see here near fructose 6-phosphate, here also one of the phosphate group is added, converting this into fructose 1,6-bis phosphate. Okay. Now one more thing here, what is happening is now this 1,6 bisphosphate, now here in the presence of aldolase and enzyme, this 1,6 bisphosphate, now it is breaking down into two molecules, making it as 1,3 carbon and 1,3 carbon atom molecules, in which now the glyceraldehyde, it undergoes a series of steps where the glyceraldehyde 3 phosphate, it gets oxidized into aldehydes, get oxidized into acids, that is for 1,3 bisphosphoglycerate. The 1,3 bisphosphoglycerate, again it gets broken down into 3 phosphoglycerate. 3 phosphoglycerate, again it loses it donates its one of its the phosphate molecule, that is 2 phosphoglycerate. 2 phosphoglycerate gets converted into phosphoenol pyruvate, where again our ADP will be utilizing one of the phosphate group, releasing the ATP, and at the end the product will be the pyruvate. At the end 2 pyruvate. So here at the end when we need to remember DHAP also occurs, so at the end 2 pyruvate molecules are formed. At the end 2 pyruvate molecules are formed by the lysing of glycolysis, by the lysing of glucose. When glucose get lysed, at the end 2 pyruvate molecules are formed. Not only that, if you see here ATP is utilized and ATP even is also formed. So at the end of glycolysis process, if you see here, we have 2 ATP molecules, NADH plus and H plus, that is even 2 NADH we can mention, and a pyruvate molecules, 2 pyruvate molecules will be formed. Okay. Now let us do the calculation part. Now as I told you that from the glyceraldehyde 3 phosphate near once these NADH, so each NADH carries 3 ATP molecules, so these NADH will be in the check form. So let us think as 3 ATP plus 3 AT, total 6 ATPs, but we cannot use them directly. These even though they are obtained, they undergo further process to further releasing of these ATPs. So we are left with, so directly how many ATPs are released? Twice we need to remember, here 1 ATP and here 1 ATP is released when by breaking down of glyceraldehyde 3 phosphate. Again the process is repeated with the dihydroxyacetone phosphate. So one more, here also 2 ATPs will be released, making it as 4 ATPs. But whenever the glycolysis process is occurring, one of the ATPs, if you see, that is 2 ATPs are utilized. So at the end we can see that 2 ATPs are released. So the net gain, if you see, 2 ATPs, directly we are obtaining 2 ATPs, and in the check form we are having total 6 ATPs, right? So this is what we are having in glycolysis process. So hope you have liked my video and you have understood my video. So if you are having any doubts, you can post it in the comment section, or you can use my business ID, which is shared in this link. So you can share your comments to me. And yes, definitely if you are having any doubts regarding any other topic also, I am ready to make the same video related to those particular content. So don't forget to subscribe my channel, and the people who have subscribed my channel, please do view and like it, so that as it is a free channel, definitely you will be a part of it, where the content and everything will be provided free to everyone with the notes and everything. And in my next session, even I am going to add few of the NEET related questions, so that as our ultimate aim is to crack the NEET, so I'll be adding few NEET questions too, and how these NEET questions need to be solved for this particular topic also I'll be discussing in my next session. Hope you have viewed my channel once again, and thank you. Have a good day.